does it mean to be always on? To have the entirety of human knowledge in your pocket and to know what's happening right this minute on the other side of the world, all the time? What does it mean to be always available? To be contactable, ready to respond at a moment's notice, never nowhere, always somewhere? Of course, this all has its benefits, right? But is it necessarily healthy? This is Conversations on Living, a podcast about being well, doing well, and living well. I'm Chris Brock, and this week I'm speaking with Christina Crook, author of the book The Joy of Missing Out: Finding Balance in a Wired World. She believes that being constantly connected to the 24-hour news cycle, having our relationships moderated by social media algorithms, being addicted to a constant flow of information that is curated by others who might not have our best interests in heart, and let's not forget the dopamine hit that comes from getting another like or another follow, is not only bad for us, but is sapping the life out of our days and replacing it with stress. In this conversation, we talk about why we need to be intentionally conscious about how we use technology, lest it use us, and how it is vital if we are to build healthy lives and healthy relationships, and that getting offline is, in itself, a wellness practice. If you want to find out more about Christina, her books, her speaking, and her other work, head over to www.experiencejomo.com. And you should also check out her online store where she has a range of non-digital products to help you get offline. That's at jomogoods.com. And before we get into this conversation, just a word about Plane. Plane is a meditation game, and if you've ever tried meditation and it's not quite worked for you, or you want to get into mindfulness but you enjoy video games and you're not sure how to marry the two, then Plane is the game for you. So that is Playne, and you can find it at plane.co, or you can just search for meditation game and that's the first game to come up. And if you want to find out more about this podcast, previous episodes, some of my writings, some of my meditations and that kind of thing, head over to conversationsonliving.com, and there you can find out more about me. You can find out about my newsletter that I send out kind of roughly every month, and loads more besides. So check it out. That's conversationsonliving.com. And there's also a Facebook group where you can carry on the conversation. Just search for Conversations on Living there, and you'll find us all there. And now, time to get into this amazing conversation with the fantastic Christina Crook about why sometimes it's just good to disconnect, and also the joy of missing out. So Christina, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's a really interesting conversation we're going to have because you've written the book on the joy of missing out, JOMO. And generally when people think about that, they think about the kind of pleasure you get from turning down dinner plans or something like that and staying at home with a pizza or whatever it is. But your concept is a bit more involved. It's a bit more relating to our addiction to technology. So maybe you can get things started by telling us where your story began and how this idea came to be.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for having me, Chris. JOMO is right, of course, the antithesis of FOMO, the fear of missing out. And I actually define it quite differently from the ways in which introverts have kind of grabbed a hold of this concept of, using JOMO as an excuse to stay in and reject social invitations. I am really advocating for a much more active way of being in terms of encouraging people to identify and prioritize the things that bring them alive, the things that bring them joy. And those things often are very relational. They have to do with getting outside of the four walls of your house, out your front door, and into the beating, breathing world. And so where this all began for me was I was a student of communication back in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, which is where I was born and raised. And so I was very keyed into the ways in which that technology shapes both culture and individuals. And so I began my career at the CBC, like your BBC, or the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, back in Vancouver. And so it was then that social media sort of emerged in my early career. And I was very keyed into the ways in which it was changing me and the ways it was changing my friends and colleagues and family very early on. That was all exacerbated by the fact that we moved across the continent within Canada, but it's a very large country, to Toronto, which is where I'm now based. And all of a sudden, in one fell swoop, all of my relationships, or like 99% of my relationships, were mediated all of a sudden in some way through the internet. And I started noticing that I was becoming quite passive in my relationships, the classic creeping or scrolling on people's lives, trying to glimpse a picture of what's going on with people, but was no longer going through that more engaged effort of picking up the phone and making the phone call or sending an email or whatever the case may be. And so as a creative professional, I was a writer, primarily at that time as a freelance writer. I had a couple of young kids. I am a daughter and a sister to 7 siblings, just kind of shocking to people. Mixed family, but since we were very young. And so I was very keyed into all the ways that the internet was changing me. And I had a curiosity about what would happen if I gave it up for a significant amount of time. Originally, I planned to be offline for an entire year. And bear in mind, this was already almost 10 years ago that I was feeling this overwhelm. It's almost laughable to consider it now, how things have developed and how the pace has increased. But that's where it all began for me. I did a 31-day sort of fast from the internet. I called the experiment Letters from a Luddite, because instead of actually being online, I wrote a letter every single day to the same friend and posted them in the mail. I used older technology like the pen and the typewriter, really reflecting on my experience, being in that space, the hardships, the joys. And so basically after that experiment, I wrote about the experience in a few essays for a few magazines. And by some amazing miracle, my publisher for my first book, The Joy of Missing Out, read some of those essays and asked if I would expand off of it into what would become The Joy of Missing Out and the future of my work.
Yeah, and this is the kind of business you're in. You're going into organizations, you're coaching people to encourage them to be much more mindful in the way they use technology. I started my career in the tech press back at about 1999, and I was writing about internet and web design and stuff like that in magazines. And back then, it was still dial-up technology, and the idea of having an always-on connection at home was something kind of reserved for very wealthy people, who maybe ran their businesses from home or something like that. And then suddenly we had WAP. I don't know if you remember WAP, but it was kind of very early connections on your phone, and you could do sort of very basic searches and things like that. And just the idea of kind of Blackberries and things like that, sending emails and stuff. But then came Steve Jobs. And I just remember vividly when he gave his presentation, and right at the end, he said, "Oh, and there's one more thing." And he produced the iPhone. And now we are always connected all of the time. But it's not, for me, it's not so much about being connected all the time, but it's what we're connected to. So it's we're getting a lot of negativity. We're seeing the world on fire 24 hours a day. We're constantly, we've got this kind of news cycle that's kind of going on and on and on. And it's low level stress that's just wearing us down, down and down. And it can't be healthy. I mean, there must be kind of something that it's doing to us that is unhealthy. I mean, in your research, what kind of is the outcome of this kind of constant exposure to so much information?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so widely known now that, the amount of adrenaline, right, that we're experiencing all the time, our stress levels are just, at a baseline that's so much higher than it was before these devices existed. And so the type of mindfulness that I think we're going to focus our conversation on today, right? Actively noticing new things, as Ellen Langer from Harvard would describe mindfulness. These types of practices are so much more important than ever, because we need to counteract this always on, almost a state of panic that we're throwing our bodies into all the time. So it is, I like the work of Dr. Pamela Pavlisak at Pratt University. I write about her work in my new book, Good Burdens: How to Live Joyfully in the Digital Age. She did a study where she had people track their technology experiences in journals over a number of weeks. And what she discovered was actually people that are happiest with technology use it differently. And this was a huge discovery for me because I kind of became known as the digital detox person, right? Early in this conversation, it was kind of like a shorthand, like, oh, they're, he or she or they are a digital detox person. And in the tech space, right, you kind of get like a black mark, like, oh, they're just like throwing the baby out with the bathwater sort of a thing. And so this was, quite an amazing discovery for me to find out that people that are happy with technology use it in very specific ways. But it made a lot of sense to me because of particularly the conversations I was having on my podcast, the Jomo Cast, with leading founders and writers and other creatives who somehow were harnessing the internet for good. We're somehow using it for what it really should be used for, which is as a tool, right? It's a connecting tool. It's a creative tool. It's a tool for so many different things. And what she discovered is that people who are happiest with technology use it for three things. They use it for community, creativity, and care. And I just thought that was amazing. Not just care of others, but self-care, right? Using it as a tool for self-care. And I often will say that the three big promises of big technology are that it's going to give us endless control, and it's going to give us, of course, their ultimate serving is of convenience, and comfort, right? Not leaving the house, being that JOMO person, that's hashtag JOMO, hashtag introvert, disconnecting, staying within the comfort of your home. And so I love this idea of shifting from control and comfort and convenience into community and creativity and care. And I think that shift is really this mindful path forward and living well in the digital world that we exist in now.
It's difficult though, isn't it? Because there is an addiction, there's a chemical reaction going on that is kind of, we had a storm here recently, and I mentioned this before we started recording, but there was a storm that knocked out our telephones, our internets, our mobile connections for about 6 days. And the first couple of days, I kept on reaching for my phone. Every time anything required my attention for more than just a couple of seconds, I would reach for my phone for a distraction. And it was about as useless as trying to reach for the light switch. There was no power, there was no internet connection. And I'd pick up my phone almost instinctively. And there's something going on there it's not healthy, and it's not productive. We have this, I've got it right next to me. We have all of the world's information at our fingertips, the entirety of human knowledge. We have what's happening right now all over the world. We've got, the world is burning, we've got wars going on, we've got all of this kind of stuff, and we're getting it all the time. And there's this kind of addiction to knowing and being out there in the world, facing all of the kind of hideousness of it all. That is both addictive, but also incredibly unhealthy. Why do you think we're so hooked on this, something that is so bad for us?
I mean, it is for the reason that you're describing. It is a chemical reaction, right, in the brain that is being unlocked, not just dozens of times, maybe not even just hundreds of times, but now thousands of times a day. We're hooked on dopamine, right? That chemical in the brain. And that is tied into the hook model that is built into all of the major tech platforms, right? Every time you pull down, you guys know what I'm talking about, you pull down to refresh and you're just waiting for that. And even if there's nothing there, even just watching that little circle or whatever the mechanism is on that particular platform, that's still giving you that sort of anticipatory shot of dopamine. And so it is so important to know, just baseline understanding, that this is a David and Goliath, to use that metaphor, challenge that we're facing. We're facing the most powerful, financially, powerful at this point, companies in the world, right, that are investing all of their money into keeping us addicted to their platforms, because that's the way they make money. They make money by us spending more and more time on those platforms so that we can see more and more ads. It's ad revenue for them. And so knowing that hook model of having us come back for more is there, I think is just such an important piece of baseline understanding. And of course, The Social Dilemma and these other, films that have been such a huge help in helping break that down for us. I think, related to that understanding, understanding that it's a hook model, understanding that it's built into the design allows us or can free us from the shame that so many of us feel. And I know this for a fact because this is what I do professionally. People feel so much shame around how much time they spend on technology. Those messages are everywhere. Screen time bad, for babies, for kids. I admit to being a part of that conversation. Screen time equals bad. And I do think tech overuse is a bad thing, but shame, as Brené Brown has taught us oh so well, right, is not the path to freedom. It is not the path to a new behavior. We need to get out of that place of shame and just look at things black and white and say, okay, yeah, if I take a clear, hard look at my screen time use, get into your settings, take a look at your screen time usage, understand what's happening there, understand that there's a hook model, but from there, move forward without shame, just acknowledge it. But really my focus, you probably heard this, or if you've, encountered some of my work, it's really less on creating limits on screen time than it is on creating the positive conditions in your life for other things to thrive and flourish. So that's really where my focus is.
It's difficult, isn't it, though, because we have we saw with the Cambridge Analytica crisis that these platforms that we use, this technology that we're kind of always sucked into, connected to, giving our attention to, they can affect what we think, how we think. And it's also affecting our behavior. I was reaching for my phone every 5 minutes, and it can encourage people to go out there and do terrible things. Go out there. We saw with the January protests at the Congress building in Washington. You can actually influence people's behavior, and we've seen this hugely with COVID and vaccine sort of advocates, anti-vax people coming to blows in the streets as a result of all this kind of misinformation affecting kind of people's perspectives. How much of a wrench is it going to take to get people away from that? Is it going to be literally having to peel people off with a crowbar to get people to give up their technology?
I really do think that it's the solution is going to be much more systemic for us to move away from using technology in ways that don't serve us. And I'm so grateful for organizations like the Center for Humane Technology, right, that created the social dilemma, that are being backed by so many amazing foundations that are invested in seeing things change at the highest levels within governments, policy changes, better governance for the technology companies, reformation within the technology companies themselves. But that is going to be a long, hard road. But I'm incredibly grateful. And then I do hope that people understand that there are people at the highest levels working on this issue on our behalf. I would encourage everyone to read the book Stand Out of Our Light by James Williams. He studied at the Oxford Internet Institute. It's the best book on the attention economy I've ever read. It is very readable. It is very, very short. It's actually available for free online. But really, these types of people, the James Williams of the world, really seeing how the mechanisms built inside big technology are not allowing us to live the lives that we intend to live. That's his biggest argument. He's saying, it's even in the Bible, it's like, I do the thing I don't want to do. Yeah. Like somehow the structure of the digital space is such that we do all of the things we don't want to do all of the time. It is not allowing us to live the lives that we intend to live. And that is that to me is the most compelling argument for, that's free will. It's taking away free will, at a certain level. So, yes, of course, I'm an advocate for personal change. I've made, that is my bread and butter, is helping people build better digital habits, but there is a limit, right, to what we can do individually if we don't have these larger powers, right, working on our behalf. So I think it's a both and.
Yeah. And I mean, you talked about shame previously. There is a kind of shame of not being clued up on what's going on in the world. And, a lot of people kind of say, you don't need to know every minute of the kind of Ukraine conflict at the moment. You don't need to know everything about everything as it happens. How much do we have to kind of just get comfortable with not knowing everything? How much do we need to change our own behaviors and really kind of be disciplined and to force ourselves to kind of step away, if you like.
I'm a big advocate of slower forms of news. So even it's a very old school, but having a weekly, even just a weekly subscription to the newspaper, getting the Saturday New York Times or whatever, the paper is where you're listening from, being informed at a deeper level, but at a slower pace. And the reason is that there's actually a kind of depression that grows when we feel completely disempowered to affect change. And so, and the more local your news sources, the better, because the chances are then that you actually could potentially do something. There's a local in my neighborhood. I live in the west end of Toronto, right in the city. By some miracle, we've got Margaret Atwood, is like a patron of this newspaper. It's like a very special newspaper, and it's not just news, but stories and these types of things. But I love that newspaper because when I hear a story about Henderson down the street and his situation, I can walk to Henderson's house. I know that organization, or I could find out about that organization and donate, and very tangibly connect and affect change in that way. When we're constantly consuming news, we are completely feel powerless. There actually is no true benefit to the people in that situation or to ourselves. And so slower forms of news and more localized news, I think, is a great strategy in terms of news consumption.
You talk about empowerment. I think it's very interesting that, when we are consuming kind of global news or even, national news and not on a local level, it's basically someone else choosing what is important for us to know about. And we're giving over that power every day, letting someone else feed us with whatever information they think is important to us. Even in terms of the news our friends are posting online, it's all, dealt with by an algorithm. So we do become powerless over not only what we can do to make the world better, but also what we're consuming in a way. It's almost like we're being kind of fed through a tube in a way, all this kind of stuff, which isn't necessarily doing us any good. Do you think there needs to come a pain point? Often when people go through a kind of a reawakening and they kind of go through a breakdown or whatever, and they come out the other side and they're a new person, they lose weight or they, midlife crisis, whatever you want to call it. Do you think there needs to come a pain point where individually we recognize that actually this is doing me no good, being constantly connected, in order to kind of free us, if you like, from these manacles of information?
I do. Yes, I think having that sort of crisis point is such an amazing catalyst for change. I think it is very unlikely that most people will have that. And I hate to say it, but I really do think it's true, because I'm holding up for the listeners. I'm holding up my phone right now. It is a help and a hindrance. It is a joy and it is a source of despair. This thing is not one thing. It is 1 million things at this point, right? It is the list for, the movies I want to watch with my kids. It is terrible news. It is, you just like, it's such a mixed bag. And so the pain, like, it's not a concentrated pain point with these tools. It is such a mixed bag. I'll go into corporations or schools or any kind of group and have 2 pieces of paper and I have them write down, I have different terminologies for it, but let's say life-giving, which technology is life-giving and which technology is life-taking. People write, their lists, and I will tell you, there is almost 100% overlap, because for someone, Instagram is a source of joy. For others, it is a source of pain and comparison and frustration and overwhelm. It really does come down to the ways in which you use it. So when it comes to the pain point or that crisis point that affects change in people's lives, I really wish that could be true, but that convenience and comfort and control feels really, really good. And we're so conditioned to it. Tim Wu calls it the tyranny of efficiency. It at some point begins to constrain what we're willing to do. We start to believe that things that are painful are bad, just automatically. That feels bad. I shouldn't do it. So I think it's much more complicated than that. But I'd be curious, I'm going to throw it back to you to hear if you think that there are pain points people can come to really transform this particular part of their lives. If you know of someone, I'd love to hear.
Well, I know from my own personal experience of just things I find very wearing are being advertised to constantly. When every third or fourth post is advertising, I actually find it physically tiring, like just the mental kind of being kind of mentally worn down by constantly being sold to. I find actually hard work. And then but I also noticed that I would wake up in the morning and I would go straight to Twitter as my news source, and I'd see what's going on in the world by what was trending, and whatever is trending is never anything good. And not only is it not good, but you also get the whole world's really awful opinions about it. And I'm very much kind of I don't believe in borders. I don't believe, I believe in free movement of anyone, and I feel if there's a so-called immigration crisis, it's because people are fleeing something awful. And so I'm a right kind of left wing, kind of bleeding heart liberal, if you like. But of course, on the internet, there are a lot of people who aren't like me. And so I was waking up first thing in the morning, getting deluged by people of quite strong opposing opinions to me, on top of the negativity of the thing itself, whether that's a war, whether it's, forest fires in California, whatever it might be. And it was actually starting to affect my general mood. So I get terrible seasonal affective disorder anyway. But on top of that, I was kind of brought down by everything's pointless. There's no point even trying to be happy because the world is literally crumbling in front of our eyes.
To the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And I got really quite depressed about it, to the point of kind of trying to seek help in a way as well. And I decided to take all the apps off my phone. I still love Instagram, but now in the mornings I read a book. I make a point of reading a book before I pick up my phone or anything else. I read a book, something that's
a great practice.
Yeah, and usually try and hold a physical book. But I know that it can make you physically ill as well. I know that this a lot of the conversations I've had on this podcast about the mind-body bridge, where we get a lot of unprocessed trauma, which can lead to physical ailments that are hard to diagnose. So we end up treating the ailment rather than the cause. And when you do have this constant low-lying stress, it affects your immune system, and people, especially in an age of COVID, there was a study recently that compared the reporting of COVID to people's weakened immune systems. So actually, by consuming news about COVID constantly, and seeing the body count go up on pretty much every news website, we're making ourselves more susceptible to actually catching it in the first place, which is a kind of bizarre situation.
Absolutely.
To be in.
Yeah. I get your point about, sorry. Did you want to finish your thought?
No, not at all. I was glad to throw it back to you now.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree that getting to that crisis point with specific tools, with specific platforms, I think that absolutely can and does happen. And it really does come down to, are you prepared to then make that change, right? To identify it, to first just notice it, baseline that something's off, right? And then to dig deeper, like you did, like, okay, what is the source? And like, what specifically about that source and like how I'm using it? And then, leading towards ways to change it. We do have still an enormous amount of power in terms of what we choose to consume. I recently launched a shop, the Jomo Goods Shop, which has been like a joy and a delight. And that account is following one person. It's following me. I know that's very self-involved. It's following me. I got nothing. There's nothing for me to look at. There's nothing there because I'm not following anything. And so that's a beautiful thing. I have control over that space. And every time I see, oh, you're all caught up because surprise, there's nothing for you to follow. I can move on to other things. And that's true for Twitter. That's true for just about any of the platforms, right? Where there's any kind of following element in it. So I would say, yes, I absolutely do think that there are pain points we can come to that can affect change. And I strongly encourage people to do that. Another way to kind of notice what those things might be is a practice. I alluded to a part of it earlier. It's called the examen, or the examen of conscience. It's from St. Ignatius of Loyola. It's an age-old contemplative practice, and a simple version of it, which I write about and speak about quite often, is this practice of asking yourself at the end of each day what today was most life-giving and what today was most life-taking. And just simply, you can just, sit or lie in bed and just think about it. I think it's very helpful to sort of get a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle and ask, write those two questions at the top and jot just one thing that day. And over time, you begin to notice those sources that take life, that literally steal life from you. And the beauty of this exercise, of course, you can look at that and be like, oh, Twitter is clearly a source, a negative source of my life. But even if you don't take action very tangibly, you're going to subconsciously know that to be true. And so you're going to begin to choose to do more of the things that give life, because you're like, oh, throwing the ball with my kid for 5 minutes in the middle of my work day yesterday felt really good. Like, maybe I should do that again today. Like, I actually can give myself permission to do that. So that's one of the practices I love to encourage people to try.
Yeah, that aligns with we had Oliver Berkman, the writer, on the podcast, and
Amazing.
he talks about tuning into the things that make you feel expansive. And things that don't make me feel expansive are always looking at screens. I never look at a screen and then think, oh, the world is so big and full of opportunities. I always look at a screen and think, stress, work, more things to do. Oh, gosh, I've got to log on again and do this and do that. Got to send those tweets, post to Instagram, whatever it is. But when I go outside and, take a breath of fresh air, I'm a big stargazer as well. And where I live, there's not much light pollution. So, whenever I look up and it's a clear sky, I get so much more, I'm on fire from that, as opposed to being tuned into this kind of zoned into this tiny screen or whatever. You talked about kind of some of the things that you were doing that, focusing on the things that bring you joy. You were using kind of writing these letters and getting out. And we talked about getting out into nature, or at least you mentioned it in your TED talk. There's this talk of a kind of evolutionary mismatch. So our bodies have been developing slowly over millions of years, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. But the way we interact with the world through our devices, through our, our screens, whatever it is, has only really been around for the last 50 years. And so our bodies aren't 100% compatible with how we kind of treat them, day in, day out. How important is it to get back to something a bit more rudimentary and a bit more kind of primeval, if you like?
I think it's incredibly important. And I'm not going to be able to cite a bunch of studies to you to prove to you why. I just know it in my body. I just know it to be true through my lived experience. I know, just like you do, when you're under that canopy of stars, that when I am even simply walking still in my very urban environment, moving at a natural pace, not being in the car, not looking at something that's taking me out of time and space, like my phone, noticing the things around me, that there is a calm that I experience. There is a connectedness that I experience. Even if I'm not talking to people, although I very likely will run into someone or strike up a quick hello, right, to someone as I'm walking around my neighborhood. I think it is extremely important that we have those types of experiences every day. I would go so far as to say, for exactly the reasons you're describing, because our bodies and minds were not built for this type of pace, this type of content. I like to say that, we need more than information to make meaning.
Yeah.
The internet can measure the known, but not the possible. I feel like when I'm in the natural world, like you, I see what's possible in a way. It's expansive. Yeah. It's expansive for me in a way that the internet or just staring at my computer, even if I'm doing what I consider to be great creative work, doesn't do for me.
Do you think we're addicted to doing? Do you think there's this kind of addiction to being productive all the time that's actually wearing us out, making us feel old and a bit kind of decrepit?
Absolutely. And it is capitalism, 100%. That is that push. And I need to be reminded of that all of the time. I was speaking one of my best friends, Sarah Selecki. She's an amazing novelist, and said the other day to Sarah, like, what's wrong with me? Like, am I a crazy person? She's like, capitalism. Just a reminder, capitalism. That's the push. Like, yes, yes, right. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, like we're primed. That's the what is a great push of our age, right? Is to consume and produce more. Period. And so Flannery O'Connor writes, you have to push as hard as the age that pushes you. You have to push back as hard as the age that pushes you. So if you're being pushed to endlessly produce and to endlessly consume, then you push back by not.
It's almost like a rebellious act then, because putting your phone
Mm-hmm.
down and going outside for a walk. It's like an act of rebellion against whatever this world is we've created for ourselves. When I was growing up, I remember the only person who had a mobile phone was the doctor, and he would come around with this big briefcase thing, and it cost about £10,000, and he needed it because he was an on-call doctor.
The brick,
Yeah,
right?
but
Yes.
well, it was even bigger than that. It had
Oh,
had a
wow.
handset and a separate, I guess it was a
Amazing.
battery
Yep.
pack.
Mm-hmm.
And they were connected up,
Yep.
enormous thing.
Yep.
And it was just like, well, we could understand that because he was a doctor and he needed to be reached at all times. But we don't need to be reached at all times. And in fact, disappearing for an hour is actually probably a good well-being tactic a little bit.
Yeah, I strongly advocate for a technology Sabbath, or just one day a week where you completely unplug. It's something that we do with our family. It happens to be on Sundays for us because that's the day that works for us. I'm always amazed by the things we find to do and the conversations we end up having that we just don't have otherwise, with all of the other distractions. Like, let's just watch a show together, right? Let's just X, Y, or Z. It's such a great reminder that we're not the center of the universe, that the world keeps turning without us. Like, actually, if you just didn't go back online in a month, like the end, the world would still be going. I think those are healthy reminders. It repositions us into the right frame, right, for understanding who we are in our very tiny part in this great wide world.
Absolutely. And when the power came back after the storm that I mentioned 6 days later, I hadn't missed anything. Everything was still ticking along. There was no important emails that I'd missed, nothing that could be kind of put off or postponed or anything like that. I'd missed nothing. But yet I'd been in that kind of stressful state of, what if I'm missing something? What if someone needs me? As if I'm a doctor, if I'm an ER doctor or something, which I'm quite clearly not. Do you think that, you work for yourself, you have your own business.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that it's very easy to be glued to your laptop all the time, trying to kind of build new leads, reach out to new people? You're writing one of your books, you're kind of, promoting your business. How do you kind of create boundaries between kind of work and space to go and do something else that is not connected to the internet?
Generally, I try to work during the hours that my kids are at school, which is kind of a cliche parent thing to do, but it really works as a very concrete container for me, because I like to connect with them when they get back from school. And there's no reason truly why I shouldn't be able to get all of my work done in that 6.5 hour window. It's just, it is possible. So those are, that's a really concrete way for me. When I'm writing, thank God it's spring here in Canada. I know it is for you there as well. I like to do most of my creative work outside, and that automatically constrains my internet access, or I choose to not, use a hotspot or something like that. And I find my best writing happens out of doors. I had Emma Gannon on my podcast recently, and she was kind of like an aha moment. She remembered, oh yes, oh yeah, I can work outside. Like, that's, oh yeah, we can do that. Great. So those are a couple of the practices I have. I'm actually in the process of, I'll just be honest, of really recording, like very methodically going through all of the parts of my business and writing down all of the pain points, all of the things that are causing me pain. And I want to systematically begin removing them, because this is why I'm self-employed. This is why I work for myself. I want to be doing my best work. I want to be doing work that's expansive and brings me alive. I'm a better parent. I'm a better spouse. I'm a better friend. I'm a better neighbor when I'm doing work in that way. So I think that maybe you find this with your work too. There's kind of like, it encroaches and then you kind of like got to pare it back. It's like a bush or something. It's like grows a little out of control and you got to pare it back. And I think I'm in a paring season again in my life.
There is, there is a sense that, everything is constantly changing. So you don't just kind of fix it and suddenly you're no longer addicted to the internet. You have to kind of keep a constant eye on it and be present. And the problem with the internet and all of these things is they very much stop us from being present. You're thinking about the future, or you're tuned into something going on around the world. Do you think we have a kind of a fear of introspection and being present in our lives and taking responsibility for actually what's going on right here and now? And the internet and that always on connection kind of absolves us a little bit of that responsibility because our mind is elsewhere.
Absolutely. I 100% think so. And that's basically what my book, Good Burdens, is all about. The idea with Good Burdens is there's these certain activities that once you get across a certain threshold of effort, things that we often maybe want to avoid, once we get across that threshold, the burden of it disappears and it becomes a joy. So maybe that big project you want to tackle or that relationship you want to invest in, but you're like, do I really want to put the effort into it? That there is joy on the other side. And I speak from experience. I know that the internet can be an amazing hiding place. It is very easy to hide out there. It is very easy to avoid feelings, action in those spaces. I also know that dullness, that sameness, that deadness that can breed in that space of not really doing anything of value, of not investing yourself deeply in relationship, which is, let's just be honest, off the internet, is not the path to joy. It is the path to despair and to loneliness. And so, yes, I think we use the internet all of the time to avoid hard things. I think the internet can be used for good burdens, like those people that use it, the happiest people, right? For care and community and for creativity, giving our best, growing, listening to podcasts like this. But I think we need to be really aware of when it's becoming a hiding place and take that step into the real world.
It sounds very much like mindfulness, but and being present. But you've talked about intentionality versus mindfulness. Are they two things that can work together? Intentionally focusing your attention somewhere that's beneficial to you and less harmful, or are they two kind of opposing ideas that we'll just touch on it briefly?
I think you have to have the intention to be mindful. That sort of helps explain it. I don't think you are mindful accidentally. You could be, I don't think that can happen. There was this big aha moment. I referenced Dr. Ellen Langer. She popularized the study of mindfulness, in the 80s. She wrote the book on it. So they just, put out the 25th anniversary edition of mindfulness. And she defines it as actively noticing new things. And I interviewed her at the beginning of the pandemic, and she is a very fiery old lady and she wanted a clear shot of the pandemic. She was like, I don't want to talk about anything else. I'm talking about mindfulness and the pandemic. Let's go. And it was talking with her where I realized that the experience of joy, and I'm circling back to your question, that the experience of joy involves two things. It involves noticing and nurturing. It involves attention and effort. There's something about it where it's not just being attentive. It's both and. And so I think you have to be intentional and being mindful, trying to actively notice new things. Like you can be in front of the most beautiful sunset in the world But if you're not attentive to it, right, you miss it. You miss that potential experience of joy. Um, and I think that's why a lot of our experience online is not really joy, because it doesn't involve enough of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not being active or attentive in that space. It's very passive.
Mary Oliver wrote a poem, Instructions for Living a Life, and there are two lines in it. One is pay attention, and the other one is be astounded. And certainly the more I seem to pay attention to the big things like the stars and the sunsets and everything else, the more I'm astounded by even small things, the swaying of the grass or just little pleasures that the world offline has to offer, the flavor of your food, all of that kind of stuff. When you start to practice that, it really becomes, your world becomes much richer rather than just scrolling through pictures of food on Instagram or whatever it is. I mean, it's a big call, isn't it, to get offline and start living, really, I
It
guess.
is a it is a big call. Mary Oliver also wrote, attention is the beginning of devotion. That where we put our attention is a signal of what we're devoted to. And that devotion grows or it, right, or recedes over time. It can grow or it can go away. So I think it is a big call. I joked with, the title Good Burdens. Like, it's a bit of a hard pill to swallow. No one wants any more burdens right now. Like, asking people to do more, right, isn't really the message that we're wanting. But it is a simple shift. It's like realizing, like you're saying with the food thing, like when you're attentive to it, you're like, oh, I got to cook dinner. But if you can think of cooking dinner even as a good burden, look at this beautiful food. The fact that I get to cook it for myself or maybe for other people. I've got 3 kids. I'm going to go cook dinner right now. It's a good burden, right? That can become a joyful experience if I'm attentive to it, if I'm actively participating in it, if I'm mindfully, if I'm noticing new things about it. It is, it is a bigger call asking people to step away from devices and really be present in the real world. But I think the benefits are so great. And once you have a taste of it, if you can just, keep going after more, it's worth the effort.
Yeah, because I feel, and we'll start to wrap up in a minute, but I really feel that whether you're religious or not, whatever you believe about, where we come from, I think that life can be a spiritual experience. I think a sunset can move you, even the smell of a delicious dinner can move you, and I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh who said, the miracle is not walking on water, but it's walking on the earth every day and being present and being connected to the earth. That's where the real miracle is. And we're all living miracles every day, but we're too busy kind of checking our lottery numbers or emailing the boss or all that kind of thing. Meanwhile, the planet we're standing on is spinning around a sun in the infinite, miraculous universe. And we're too busy wondering, whether we're going to get that promotion or not, or whether we're going to, get that new car or whatever it is.
Or if someone liked your post.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that little hit of, that kind of those brain chemicals that we'd probably get a few more hits if we just saw if anyone had gone in the bird box we just put outside or something like that, see if our vegetables were sprouting in the garden. But there we go. Well, it's a really wonderful conversation. And I think it's such a strong message there to just disconnect, even if it's for an hour a day or 20 minutes, whatever you can, but be aware of what you're consuming, both kind of in your body and in your mind, and take ownership of that. So in terms of sorry,
I was just going to say that there's joy, my whole message is the joy of missing out. And it really is the joy of missing out on the right things to make space for what matters most. That's Absolutely. Really the message.
And we're surrounded by so much meaning all the time. So, I mean, you've got your family, you've got your work, you've got, we all are surrounded by so many amazing things that are just passing us by. I think Ferris Bueller probably said it best. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Yep, absolutely. Brilliant. So if people want to find out more about Jomo, your book, your work, some of the other things you do, your other writings, your new book that you've got coming out soon, where can they go to find out?
They can go to experiencejomo.com, and you can find everything there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that. I'm going to go and put my phone down now and go and have a offline experience for the rest of the evening. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much, Chris.
So there we go. That was the fantastic Christina Crook telling us why we all need to experience a bit more JOMO, the joy of missing out. You can find out more about her and her work at experiencejomo.com, and also there's that online store again where she sells those fantastic items that help us kind of get a bit more pleasure out of life offline. That's jomogoods.com. And next week we're speaking to Polly Bateman. She is a performance mindset coach, and that's a kind of simple way of putting it. But she believes that we can only really enjoy the life that we came here to live if we can connect with and align with who we really are, without all the trappings of our lives, our cultures, all the programming that keeps us kind of going off the right track and keeps us, a little bit dissatisfied with life. So wherever you get this podcast, don't forget to rate, review and subscribe, and don't miss out on that. And don't forget, you can also find out more about other episodes throughout whatever platform you use to get your podcasts, or at conversationsonliving.com. And there you can also sign up to our newsletter, download meditations, there's my writings, all that kind of stuff as well. So until next week, have a lovely day.